On April 10th of 2024, Dr. Hilary Cass, who was hired by the NHS to do an independent review of their system, except there's a lot of things that were wrong with this report, including not including anyone that had any skin in the game. No transgender people could be on the board. No professionals with transgender, with experience with transgender patients was allowed to be on the board. So only people that had no actual training, no actual experience working with transgender people were hired to assess transgender people.
Now, it was said to be an independent review. That was what it was supposed to be, a review that was completely independent, that had no sort of ideological bias. And yet, Dr. Hilary Cass, very early on, we found, was following groups like Transgender Trend, LGBT Alliance, groups that essentially say that being trans is a trend, that we should drop the T from LGBTQ people. And then in 2022, we discovered via court documents that she was working with Governor Ron DeSantis' medical team in Florida to help ban care in Florida in a very similar way to what they are doing now in the UK.
Just as a regular person with no medical degrees of any kind, that's problematic. Because applied to anything else, right? Let's apply this to cardiology, right? Something that some of us need at some point in our life, which is unfortunate, but we do. And let's say people who were either not in the field of cardiology, I mean, they're still doctors, but they're not the same kind of doctors, right? A cardiologist is a specialist. So a doctor that works with transgender patients would probably be considered a specialist in that field. So let's say you have a bunch of GPs, general practitioners, get together in a room and decide what is the best standard of care for cardiology patients. Would you listen to that? Because I certainly wouldn't. And if countries made laws based on that information, wouldn't you take issue with that? Here's the kicker. We're not going to include everything that's out there. We're only going to include things that conform to our biases going in. Anything that's antithetical to that, we're just going to admit because it's going to be low quality. What? That should be the biggest red flag. That they decided to get rid of information that didn't meet their narrative. That's exactly what they did. We got people in the anti-trans, community going after people that are trans allies, like myself. Trans people deserve to exist. They aren't incapable of knowing what they are or who they are. In fact, I argue these people have better sense of self than most cisgender people. That has been my assessment from interacting with transgender people, listening to transgender stories, understanding their plight, understanding they're often turned away from housing. They're often turned away from getting jobs, which is gross. So we have people that are living in basically poverty all the time because they're shunned so hard. Like there's doctors and it's mounting up. The amount of doctors coming out against this, psychiatrists, pediatricians, endocrinologists, there's a bunch of people coming out like, no, this is not right. This is not okay. This is based on pseudoscience. This is based on biasy. One person said, when I was contacted by Dr. Cass's team, it was apparent to me that the result had already been written. That Cass had no interest, or Cass's team had no interest in what she was telling them. We've all been there. Have you ever talked to somebody that as you're talking, you're like, you don't really care what I'm saying, do you? Blocking children from puberty blockers, which have been used since the 70s. In fact, I think there's even before that. but have been used in America since the 70s for precocious puberty. Basically early onset puberty. Say a girl, apparently around 8 years old, is around puberty, the earliest that it should start. But if you're 6 and you're growing breasts, that might be a problem for you. In fact, I know it would be a problem for somebody because when I was 8, that's when I started developing breasts. And it was a problem for me as a cisgender girl. I was called a slut. I was called a whore. I was called all kinds of vile shit because I went through puberty like normal people. But I was going through it before everybody else. Literally, no one else in my class was going through puberty. This Cass report, all it did was prove to me that what J.K. Rowling is saying and people that support her, J.K. Rowling, her views are wrong. And I honestly think her views are malicious in intent. I honestly do. I honestly do, because there's so much information out there that she's ignoring. There's so much information that Cass ignored. I believe she has malicious intent because she was working with Ron DeSantis's banning transgender care in Florida. She was involved in that process. And then I found a video from Dr. Cass like 3 years ago saying how they're going to include transgender people. They're going to include, people that have gone through the system, include doctors and providers of transgender care. But they didn't do any of that.
But this, based on your piece this morning in your Substack, Aaron, in the morning, which I'd encourage everybody to read, that's incredibly misleading because of reasons we'll discuss.
NHS England tapped Dr. Hilary Cass to do a review. And this review was selecting a certain number of experts, quote unquote, that were not actually experts on trans care. And in fact, it excluded anybody who had any sort of expertise in dealing with trans people, specifically, and it was designed to do so. And over the course of 4 years, we started to get study leaks that this report was going to come out eventually and that it was going to be targeted at transgender people.
No, Dr. Cass said she listened to a bunch of people's stories and, she said, yeah, it looks like it does help some people. But there's a lot of information about how safe puberty blockers actually are. Now, yes, can it have an impact on your bones? Absolutely. But are there ways to mitigate that? Absolutely. There are ways to mitigate it. Doctors tell patients, this is what you need to do. Just because some people might have a bad reaction or a bad time with any medication doesn't mean we take it off the market for everyone. Does it? No, it doesn't. Because there's so many medications on the market that have had bad indications for some people. Lots of people can't take morphine. That's still there's a lot of people that can't take morphine. I'm not one of them. I actually can't take morphine, but I'm one of the people that can't take Dilaudid. When they try to prescribe me medication for pain, they always want to give me Percocet. I'm allergic to Percocet. So I only take Vicodin. It's the only one I will take is Vicodin. It's the only one my body can even handle because it is beneficial to some people. Not all people, but some. Here is the interesting thing. I don't think the NHS of England, which is their National Health Services, are actually banning puberty blockers for early onset puberty. I think they're still using it for that. It's also used in a variety of other ways. Puberty blockers have known to treat cancer, certain types of cancer. We have a ton of information from children that have taken puberty blockers to stop the progression of their puberty when they were going through it too early. So why is it not the same for the children who want to take it to stave off puberty for a couple years so they can make a better informed decision, so they can see if it changes over time for them? And I have a theory that when transgender people aren't supported by their family, their friends, their health system, when they don't trust the systems around them because of who they are, because of their very existence, they have a really hard time. You know, I've read stories of people that said, you know, I want to detransition, not because I'm not transgender, because I absolutely am, but it's so hard. And I hope people don't treat detransition for that, but I understand if they did, because it is hard. It's hard to live in a world when a giant majority of people hate you. It's exhausting. It's exhausting for me, and I'm not even at all affected by it, other than mentally. I can't even imagine what it's like for transgender people who just want to be safe. They want to be able to work. They want to be able to get housing. And they just want to be themselves. I mean, growing up, people kept saying, just be yourself, Melissa, be yourself. People will like you if they're going to like you. And as I grew up, I realized that people didn't like me because I'm neurodivergent. But I didn't understand that until I was much older. But just because I'm neurodivergent doesn't make me any less smart, doesn't make me any less capable. And like I said, these people have such a great sense of self. It's amazing how well they know themselves. And they know who they are. But society tells them you're wrong. And then we have this whole like holistic approach they want to go to that sounds a lot more like therapy, which is terrifying. It is so utterly destructive to people. Conversion therapy, pray the gay away. I don't know what slogan you would have for transgender people, but it's disgusting and gross and often faith-based. Often faith-based.
It is torture. There is no other word for it. And it is slow, it is insidious, it is creeping, and it is all destroying.
Anya was 15 when she was sent to a retreat in southeast London run by a lay Catholic organisation. There, they subjected her to transgender conversion practices, which included sleep deprivation. She's agreed to speak to us if her face isn't shown on camera. We've also changed her name.
While they didn't understand what they were doing, they were trying to cure me and my, what we now term gender identity. They saw it as deeply flawed, deeply wrong, something I should be ashamed of.
It's a practice which will not be included in upcoming Westminster legislation.
It's just a joke. You know, there is going to be religious exemption. There's going to be the idea that you can consent to this. Nobody consents to conversion therapy.
The government says it's too complicated to include trans conversion practices in this legislation. Do you think it is?
It is complex. I totally agree that. But we can solve it very simply by agreeing that children need to be allowed to be children. They need to be allowed to be themselves. And if that means that some of them, approximately 1%, are transgender, they need support. They don't need to be told they're wrong.
And anyone who has previously been religious and is now not religious and had a traumatic experience with any kind of church knows exactly how manipulative religion can actually be. Because there's a lot of people willing to use their religion like a weapon. And it's disgusting and it needs to stop. It's also disgusting treating people less than human just because you don't agree with them. This is already being used in the United States. They're already using this Cass report that is pseudoscience, that has nothing to do with science. One of their references is an anti-trans YouTube page. Like, why are you referencing them? They obviously are biased. But so was a couple of the doctors. So were some of the people that were on that team. They were absolutely biased. I think Dr. Cass was biased, is still biased. If I was a pediatrician, I would never work with the DeSantis people, ever. Why would you do that? Why would you work with them to get rid of transgender care? Because that was their goal. And I'm pretty sure they didn't hide that. I mean, DeSantis is very public about the fact that he thinks transgender people should not exist, that it's hurting children, but it's not. They say it's hurting children, but that's what they're doing. They're hurting the children with their draconian laws. This isn't a problem that needs to be solved. We need to stop demonizing people for just being themselves. We tell that the children the entire time they grow up. And then when they get to old enough to understand how much of bullshit that really is, because being yourself can be a death sentence to you, because plenty of people are verbally and physically assaulted for just being trans. How is that okay? It's not. So if you're anti-trans and you're in my comment section, better make some sense. Because I tell you, majority of the people that are in my comment section are wildly out of touch with actual reality. Thanks for watching.